In this video, I'm going to show you a wildly overlooked feature of ChatGPT that lets you take individual custom GPTs and turn them into a workflow of different agents where you can create your own agent army to help you accomplish whatever you need in your business. It's literally a feature that's been around for months. And the more we do consulting calls with different companies, the more I see that the average person doesn't know this even exists. If you stick around, I'm not only going to show you how to use this feature, but I'm going to show you 4 key examples of different agents that I put together. And I'll give you the pleasure and luxury of watching me squirm building one live so you can see all the troubleshooting you might need to do to build a perfect mini AI agent that you can then call in normal ChatGPT. If you don't know who I am, my name is Mark and I run my own AI automation agency called Prompt Advisors for the past 2 years. We work with companies in all industries to better understand where to put AI in their workflows. What I'm going to do first is jump into some slides to break down the concept of exactly what I'm talking about, breaking down the anatomy of a GPT to better understand which part we're focusing on today, and then we'll jump into ChatGPT where I'll not only demo how to use this feature, but I'll also break down the 4 different examples I've put together, and as promised, I'll create something on the spot to see how we'd add another quote-unquote agent to our army on the fly. If that sounds interesting to you, let's dive right in. All right, so the first question is, why would you even attempt to build some semblance of an agent army in ChatGPT? Now, there are frameworks that exist that try to create that agent experience, but from my experience, a lot of them need some technical expertise. Meaning if you're not a Python developer, if you're not a mediocre programmer like I am, then you will need to go back and forth with something like GPT, take their entire repo on the GitHub websites or their actual code bases, and try to finagle and understand how to best use that framework. But realistically, for the average person, you're not going to do that. So how can we achieve an agent-like experience using something that is as accessible as ChatGPT? Now, using it within ChatGPT will require you to manually call upon each quote-unquote agent to do a specific task instead of having them autonomously manage themselves. And in my opinion, having experimented with all of these frameworks for multiple clients, they are cool, they are amazing for experimenting, but when you go to an actual production scenario, you have different layers of complexity that make these frameworks, at least in the way they are today, a bit difficult and unpredictable. One is the component that large language models themselves are not deterministic, meaning there is always this small element of chaos, this unpredictable force where out of 100 runs, maybe one of those runs, the large language model doesn't do what you're actually expecting it to do. And while you have things like temperature and top P and the ability to actually manipulate a prompt itself, these are still out of reach for the average business owner that already has a million things going on, let alone having to learn how to actually monitor all these agents, making sure they do what they're supposed to do. So in a way, when we actually create it in this platform, we are forcing a human in the loop, just like this image here, where the AIs are doing a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the dirty work, but you are in the middle, always making sure you're taking the output from one agent and making sure it's exactly what you want before you hit the next agent up to do the next task. Now, in terms of custom GPTs themselves, this is not a brand new piece of information, but I just want to level set to make sure anyone watching is on the same page. So in general, a GPT is programmed by a core prompt, which is around 8,000 characters as of today that you can input, and you can give it a bunch of context and instructions on what it should do every single time you interact with it. Now, the tools you have at your disposal with a GPT are its knowledge base, the ability to create a conversation starter, which is basically creating small shortcut buttons that kickstart the conversation, and the last thing are its capabilities, which are creating images with DALL-E, browsing the web with Bing, and using Code Interpreter to take on more advanced tasks that might require some more math or number crunching. Now, one core feature, which is the most important feature to me and the most important feature for this video, is the ability to integrate custom actions. Again, this is something that existed from the get-go from around November of last year. But I would say the average business owner now is starting to hear and see real use cases from using the custom functions, from anywhere to integrating your own custom code, to calling something like Make or Zapier, to creating some form of bridge to your CRMs or existing tools that you use day to day. And this is a very potent feature that takes a custom GPT from good to great. And this is the core feature that will allow us to create our own mini agent army. Now, I've spoken a lot about this army. Let's reveal our individual soldiers that I'll be demoing to you today. So the first one is going to be a combination of Replit agent and Pinecone assistant. This is not a brand new thing. You've seen this before in a previous video where I talk about how to have 100% accurate answers. In addition to that, we're also going to have one custom GPT that connects to a make automation that will create a proposal for you in seconds based on some very basic requirements from your client. The next one I'm going to show is Airtable, which is going to be my proxy for a CRM, where we're going to be able to log the information of a new contact and just programmatically say, hey, store this in my database, and it will automatically use an automation to store it directly in Airtable. The last one is one that took me a while to put together, but I think it's really cool, which is using a platform that's called OpenRouter that lets you access multiple LLMs, including Perplexity, including Llama, including Grok, all through one API for one set of costs that you'll be able to call in a custom GPT to switch between different LLMs depending on the task you're actually looking to execute. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just jump into ChatGPT to show you this function I've been talking about, which honestly is not a big deal. It's a very basic function, but its application is where its real firepower comes in. All right, so I fired up GPT, and you can see on the left-hand side, we have each of the GPTs we've discussed before, and I'll show you now a sample of how you can unify them all in one workflow where the output of one can speak to the input of the next, etc. So if you open a brand new non-custom GPT tab and you just use the normal GPT-4o tab in this case, you can go and just use the letter @ and you'll see all of your GPTs are listed there. So you can actually talk to a specific custom GPT while you're within the general interface of a general ChatGPT session. So if we go in here and we say something like, let's go to @client database, and I say, hey, can you store this person for me in my CRM? I'm going to say Jimmy Smith, and then his number is this, and then his email is jimmy.smith@smith.com. Very creative. And then I'm also going to say he works for Jimmy Smith Co. Ltd. So in this case, I'm calling my agent, in this case, my little custom GPT, to remotely take care of this for me. So in this case, it's going to say it wants to talk to Airtable, which is exactly what I want. Once it confirmed this, it's going to quote unquote talk to Airtable, and it says it's already added to the CRM. So if we go to my Airtable tab here, you'll see that Jimmy Smith was just added here. Very basic, nothing crazy. Now, what if we use that context to switch the context and say, you know what, let's make a proposal for Jimmy. If I say @proposal maker, can you please create a proposal for Jimmy? So it's going to say I need some details here, and that's a part of the programming of the custom GPT that I'll show you. But pretty much I'll say, 1, he wants to build a voice assistant for his manufacturing business. 2, I'll say he needs some consulting as well as the build for the voice assistants. Excuse my spelling or lack thereof. And the last thing I'll say is budget is around $20,000 US. So assuming this is good enough in terms of detail, it will ask me if it should speak to an automation in Make, and this is said automation. When I click confirm, it should send that information and then put it through this automation and come back with a response saying, hey, it's all done. And then that should populate in a proposals folder where I've told it to actually end up. So if we click on confirm, fingers crossed it works, and it says it's talking to it. So you can see here, it has received that command programmatically, and it's now taking that detail I gave it in terms of the 20,000, what they're trying to accomplish, and it's creating the proposal, putting it into Markdown, then writing that to a Google file, then uploading that to my proposals folder. And if we go into my proposals, you'll see here if I refresh, you should see a proposal for Jimmy Smith, and it's already been formatted and put together. Now, obviously, I'll have to remove this or go back to the GPT step where it actually created this proposal. But if you see the formatting has already been put together, you even have a table that's programmatically put together, all from very basic information. So we've gone from initially storing Jimmy in our CRM to creating a proposal for Jimmy. And then the next step is what else can we do for our friend here? So if we go back, I can say, you know what? I'm good for Proposal Maker. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to want to call my router agent and say, you know what? I want to write an email to present my proposal to Jimmy in a very bespoke way. And I love the way that Claude speaks. So I'm going to say, hey, router agent, can you use Claude Sonnet to write an email to Jimmy saying I'd love to work with him on this project. Make it from Mark at Prompt Advisors. Now, one key note here, because we're using the open chat, the open session of ChatGPT, not a custom GPT, that means you can actually leverage other features you have. So if you have the memory feature, and if you're not familiar, if you write, remember my name is whatever, or remember my favorite color is blue, ChatGPT will actually try to remember that. So let me open a new tab here just to drive that point home. If I open a brand new tab and I say, remember that my husky's name is Moon, it should say memory updated. There we go, continue. And it'll always remember that. And now it's a part of its underlying memory bank. Typically, if you're using a custom GPT, you can't access your memories, at least as of today. In a normal ChatGPT session, you can. So not only do you have access to these multiple agents, but you can also combine that with custom instructions for your GPT environment, with memories, and then you can create a very potent and tailored experience where you are the human in that loop. Now, if we go back here and send that request, it should invoke the other function in the router agent. And if we click confirm, this should actually programmatically send this request to Claude through OpenRouter and come back with a response written by Claude instead of the GPT here. And you'll see here it took literally less than 5 seconds. I didn't speed up this part of the video, and it was very quick. And if I say, you know what, never mind, can you write it using Grok? It will then ask me to confirm again, which I can get rid of, by the way. I can show you very quickly how you can get rid of that feature. We'll get this output here that's written by Grok now, and that's all good. And let's say I want to also use Router Agent to use it to talk to Perplexity and say, you know what, Jimmy's company is in Maine, in the United States. Give me some research about manufacturing in Maine. I can say, can you use Perplexity to do a quick search and return a bulleted list on what the manufacturing sector in Maine, USA, looks like. Now I'm going to just correct this just in case it interprets as the Maine, USA, whatever that is. And if I send this request, it should be smart enough to now route it to Perplexity, which will then go to the internet, do some research, and come back. Now, it didn't work the first time, and I want to show this error on purpose because I said Perplexity, but technically the model that's in my backend is called Sonar. So if I say send it to Sonar instead. There we go. So the naming there, naming convention, that's one thing I could have maybe specified in my schema. And if you don't know what a schema is, I'll show you what that looks like later on. But now it's done that research using quote unquote Perplexity, which is called Sonar. And then it comes back with this information. And I know that it's done some research to come to this. So that's how you'd use this next one. All right. And to demo our last agent, I'm just going to X out of here. And now I'm going to say to Knowledge Master, there we go. I'm going to say, can you please tell me some stats about the manufacturing sector in Maine I can use to improve my email to Jimmy. Now, this lives in what's called Pinecone Assistant. And again, if you don't know what Pinecone Assistant is, I dedicated a whole video to demo how to actually hook that up to a custom GPT. But fear not, one thing I'm going to do to keep this video as lean as possible is I'm going to have some very quick Loom recordings on how to actually integrate this to a custom GPT, as well as all these custom GPT instructions available in my Gumroad description below. So you'll have access to everything and hopefully not have any problems actually setting them up. Now the crash course is Pinecone Assistant is a virtual, let's call it a brain, where you can upload some files, not do much more than that, just connect the name and API key to an assistant, and then you can answer questions about your documents, assuming they're not photocopies, but real PDFs in real time. So if we go into Pinecone here, and I created a new assistant that's called My Assistant, and if we go to this files here, I can go and look for Maine USA manufacturing sector PDF. And when we click on the file here, this will open up what seems to be 28 pages, a 28-page deck on the industry profile as of May 2023. And if we scroll through, you'll see here we have a mixture of graphs, tables, and what we want to do is basically battle test and see if we pick a random stat off of a basic page here, like let's say this one, demand comparison. What if I ask the question, where does Maine rank among all states for total demand for manufacturing in general? So we should be able to download this file to our desktop, and then upload that file here. And I'll just delete this so you can get a better sense for how long it takes, which for a file like this, which is only around, I think, 2 megabytes, takes under 15 seconds. I'll just double click import. And then what it's going to do is it's going to convert that entire document into something readable by this vector database by vectorizing or turning these chunks in that document into numbers that a large language model can easily speak to in their own language, let's say. So it took around 10 seconds and it finished. If I ask that question, how does Maine rank compared to other states when it comes to demand for manufacturing? It should be able to pinpoint that specific stat and say 42 and tell me exactly which page, which in this case, it got that perfectly right. So if we go back here, just confirm, again, 42 and is on page 12. So now that I know this works, basically what I can do to hook this up to a custom GPT is, one, you do have the option where you can directly connect Pinecone to the actual custom GPT through an API connection through their custom actions. But what I like to do sometimes is have this middleware in between. And if you've watched this channel before, you already know it's Replit. The reason why I like to use Replit is it affords me the flexibility to not only make one API call and then connect that specifically to my custom GPT, but it acts as this middleware that lets me build on top of it. So if I have different functions where I get an answer from Pinecone and I then maybe want to transform it in a certain way, or add a small mini LLM step that takes that answer and formats it in a way that makes it easier for me to kind of wrangle it back in the custom GPT, that gives me that flexibility and that malleability there, which is why I bias towards building things like this for connectors like Pinecone. And the nice thing about this is that all I have to do is go down to the secrets tab here and just make sure that my assistant's name is the correct one compared to what we have in Pinecone Assistant. So that's straightforward. And I would just need to go and get my API key, which is here in API keys. So you can just copy this, paste it there, and then you can deploy this. And again, to deploy in Replit, it's paid. So you have to use their core plan of $25 a month. If you're only using it for Pinecone, then maybe it's not worth it. But as you see more and more use cases, and as you maybe get inspired by this video on all the different connections you can make, that $25 pays for itself very quickly if you're using it for multiple applications. So now I should be able to go back to our custom GPT where we left off and ask that question by saying @knowledge master and then pasting the question from before, which is, can you please tell me some stats about the manufacturing sector in Maine I can use to improve my email to Jimmy? So if I send this, this should invoke the knowledge master. And because we have this stack that basically connects Replit to Pinecone Assistant in real time, anytime I upload a file there, it should automatically be able to be communicated in this custom GPT. So when I click confirm, this should be able to speak to Pinecone Assistant, check that it actually has a brand new file, and then check that file for an answer. And you can see here it's talking and in the middle of finding the response. And you can see here, it already knows about that file and has gone through and given us specific stats. Now, one thing in that knowledge master would be helpful is if I asked it, hey, could you reference the page numbers or the specific sections where you're getting this from? In our case, we already tested it, so we know a lot of these are grounded in the actual file itself. And if we look for 19.5 billion somewhere in this file, I'm 100% sure we'll find it. So you can see here, total sales, 19.5 billion. Total demand in Maine, 19.5 billion. So that's definitely coming from the file itself. So now we just have another agent in our repertoire that's an expert at pinpoint accuracy knowledge. So now, in terms of our mini Avenger team, we have this proposal maker. We have this ability to change LLMs for different tasks. We have the ability to write to our quote-unquote CRM, which you could literally swap out for anything from Go High Level to any other CRM that has an API that you can speak to using Zapier or Make. All right, and now that I've showed you a demo of how to use this quote-unquote multi-agent experience with a human in the loop, I'm going to show you a preview of how these are all built in the backend to allow them to do what they just did in front of you. And just to keep this video as lean as possible, so I'm not dragging on and rambling, I'm going to have a mini loom on how to set up each one, along with the schema I put together, the prompt I put together, and some additional instructions to get you started. If we go back to the first one, the Replit Assistant plus Pinecone, that's pretty straightforward. Like I just went over, you have Pinecone, you have an API. I basically built that Replit code so that you can swap the assistant, swap the API key, and then those you sync to custom GPT via a schema that again will be available in the description below. Numero dos, the make scenario. This one's a bit trickier. So when you go into the proposal maker here and we go behind the curtain, you'll see that I have this prompt, which is you are a custom GPT for prompt advisors. Your task is to collect 5 essential variables from the user to generate a business proposal. Collect the following information and send it to, and this is what I like to do. I put a little mini quote around the function. It's called submit proposal variables operation. So in this case, I tell it, hey, here's the 5 things you need to make sure you collect before you initiate this request or action. And then in the action, again, I just reminded by saying invoke the submit proposal variables endpoint by sending the above JSON payload to, and then it knows how to fill that blank in. I say if any variable is missing, prompt the user to provide it prior to sending the request. So this makes sure that when make is expecting 5 variables, we indeed are sending 5 variables. And if I close this, the only other thing we have is this action here in make. And what it looks like is I am referencing this webhook. And if you don't know what a webhook is, again, I'm going to specify this more in depth in the Loom, but basically the TLDR is you have this, what's called module in make. This is what's listening in as if it's an ear for the payload of these 5 variables. Once it receives those, it automatically knows to kick off the flow. So if I was to redetermine the structure here, I would basically send it a request for the first time from the custom GPT. It would know, okay, clearly Mark wants these 4 variables or 6 variables to be taken into account. So I'm going to always listen in for that structure of payload. So if that's confusing, again, just check out the Loom. It should be helpful. Now, if you're not a coder, the rest of this might look like gibberish to you, but pretty much this is the main function here called submit proposal variables. And then it knows that it's collecting these 5 variables and that's hard coded. So client name, company name, objectives, services needed, and then budget. And then this pretty much repeats the whole thing saying, hey, if you get a thumbs up from make and you get the thumbs up in make from this other webhook, this one doesn't collect anything. This one lets you know what? This worked. It worked perfectly. That will tell the GPT, hey, this is basically worked successfully. If it doesn't work, then it returns this 400, which represents a bad request. So in the custom GPT, it would tell you, this was not good, you might want to redo it or fix the underlying make scenario. And this is the actual action that's referenced here. So this is what I was referring to in those single quotes. Once this is set up, you should be good to go. And this should work perfectly, assuming your make scenario is expecting the right outputs from your custom GPT. So that's numero dos. And if we move on to number 3, which is the client database, which is our Airtable in this case. If we go to that operation and we go to edit GPT, I have a very, very basic prompt, which says, if you want to look up a single record, invoke the get single record function. If you need to retrieve multiple client records, invoke the get client records function. And then to add a new record, invoke the add client record function. So again, here, if you go to the schema, this is the only other thing we have. In this case, there's a URL that you generate from your Airtable. I'll also specify that in the Loom, in the Gumroad description below. And if you go through, it has the breakdown of this function, which I would say this took me more time to put together, using a combination of reading the documentation, using what's called Action GPT, which I'll show you shortly, to help me build the schema until it finally worked. Now, if you're staring at this and you're about to click off the video because this looks intimidating, again, I wrote no part of this code here. Basically, I put things together, put it into GPT, put it into Action GPT, threw some documentation in there, and then I managed to get my way there. So this just takes trial and error and might take you an hour, might take you 2 hours. But when you end up building all of these and you have your mini army of 10, 15 GPTs that are all specialized in possibly not just one custom action, but 3 or 4 each, that's where you really realize the benefits of spending the time to build these out. All right, and for the last one here, the router agent. This one took a bit of skill from basically going on Perplexity saying, hey, go look at OpenRouter's documentation, which is here, documents, and then extrapolate how to call multiple models. And here are all the models that I want to actually integrate. So it would look along the lines of the following. If I went to Perplexity and I went here and I said, hey, go read these docs, tell me how I would call either Claude Sonnet 3.5 or Grok Beta using one Python request, or insert language of choice here. This would go and try to actually read that document in that URL to find out how to put it together, and then it'll use, in this case, I think Claude, to put together the file for me, or the actual payload of the JSON that it expects, as well as the Python request. And this could be wrong for the most part, so you could try this out, it might not work, but you can use this LLM and ChatGPT to help you get to that final outcome if you don't have any technical expertise whatsoever. Once you figure that out, then you can go here to the Edit Custom GPT. My prompt in this one is even more basic when it says, when I send you a request via prompt, ask me which LLM you'd like to route the request to, then invoke the generate response function. So if we go down here to the actions and we go to here, it's called OpenRouter Multi-LLM API. And again, I use a combination of Perplexity, GPT, and Action GPT, which I'll show you right after this, to put this together. And we basically have a few different operations, but the main one is called generate response, which basically takes whatever I sent in the custom GPT and then routes that to the API without using something like Replit, because this one's lean enough that I don't have to worry about that intermediary middleware. Now, one gold nugget for you is, if this looks very daunting, despite what I just mentioned, and you don't want to have to find a way to hook this up to the custom GPT every single time from scratch, you can just use Replit for everything, where Replit's your intermediary, where all you do is you copy paste this code every single time, and you take this Perplexity code every single time, and you ask GPT to put together a Replit for you for that service, so that at least your schema in the custom GPT always looks very similar. So if we go back really quick to the knowledge master, and we go to the edit GPT here, and we go to the action, this schema will actually almost look always identical if you're using Replit, because you can only structure it a certain way. It's based on all the possible paths you have in Replit, or what's called the routes. This will be the main thing you'll have to change every time by redeploying that code, assuming you're on that core plan once again. But if you want to use Replit as your intermediary or cheat code to avoid having to figure out every single variation of schema you'd need to set up in a custom action, that's something that might be helpful for you as a beginner, or someone that knows exactly what they want to do, but you don't want to spend all this back and forth time to figure out exactly how do you put together this schema, because sometimes it can be very annoying from the smallest details as to why it's not working. Now, that being said, now that I've showed you the ones that I've already put together and gone back and forth with, the last part of this video is me creating a brand new one right in front of you that I haven't built before, and you'll watch me struggle. So if you don't have the patience for that, you can feel free to click off the video. Please leave a like and subscribe before you leave. I would appreciate that. But if you want to stick around, you can watch me sweat and try to add one more function to our mini army here, so you can kind of get a sense for the process of kind of what I'm thinking while I'm struggling through it. And the only guarantee I have is I don't know if this is going to take 2 minutes, if it's going to take 5 minutes, or it's going to take 15 minutes. So please bear with me. All right, so if we take a look at what we've already built, we have a proposal maker, we have the ability to change languages, we have the ability to store to a CRM, we can look up knowledge. But one part, if we want to extend that whole automation or army suite forward, is there's no way to actually take everything we put together, or even take a portion of it and create a draft within our Gmail to actually send it to our prospects. So the automation I'm thinking about building right now is some form of automation to go from, let's say, a mini email to an attachment that we've already created, which is the proposal, then having that blend together in an actual Gmail draft. Now, when I actually plan these out, sometimes I like to create a quick mermaid diagram. So I'll say, I want to create an automation. It will first connect to a custom GPT. The custom GPT will kick off an automation that will take an email draft as well as an attachment I've stored in a Google Drive, and then put it as an attachment in a draft email on Google Mail. And then one thing, because if we go back to the proposals folder we saw earlier on in the video, we have multiple proposals that say proposal for David, proposal for Jim, proposal for Jimmy or Smith. So all of them are named the same thing. We're going to have to search for the right file at the right time and be able to look for that pretty easily. So we need to first search for the name of the file using a fuzzy search term. And I'm saying fuzzy just because I don't want it to be an exact search term, so we don't always have to verbatim remember the name of the proposal, especially if it's a unique name, right? So if it's Bob Smith, we're in trouble. But if it was a typical name, we wouldn't be in any trouble there. So we'll line that up. So once we locate file, we attach, let's say, the Google Drive link of file to email. Okay, and then I completely forgot to even say I want this to be a mermaid diagram. So I'm going to say create a mermaid diagram in code block, and then I'll resend this email here. All right, so we have this, and what we're going to do is we're going to open Mermaid Live Editor, and then I'm going to paste this. So if we take a look and I do reset, this is my overall plan. So I'm going to be able to connect this to the custom GPT, kick off the automation, receive an email draft and attachment for that search term, search Google Drive using fuzzy search, and then if the file is not found, then we got a problem. Otherwise, we want to retrieve that link and then attach it to the Google email. So in this case, I like to do things like this every single time I build something, especially in a custom GPT, to keep myself on track. Because as you start building, you lose track of sometimes what you're actually building, and you lose track of all the micro parts. So if we take this example, I'll say, can you focus on the part after the automation is triggered? Can you list out the services that would be needed in make.com to make this automation? Assuming we have a webhook that collects the GPT information. So we're going to send this, and it's making it as a mermaid diagram. I'll just say I want this in bullets, super succinct. And you'll see why in a moment why I'm saying that. Okay, so it's saying webhook collects this, then it searches file, then we get a file link, then we create a draft, and then we attach the file, and then we save the draft in the file. So I'll copy these here. And now I'll go into Make, and we'll create a brand new scenario. I'm going to show you my little cheat code here. So I go from mermaid diagram to creating this draft, and then here I'm going to paste what GPT thinks the flow should be. Okay, and then I will paste this, and then it should already pre-fill at least a lot of the blueprint for me. So a lot of the work is done on even just finding the right modules. Now we'll have to double check that it's right to begin with, but assuming it is, it'll save us some time. All right, so if we close this, we have a custom webhook that we're going to have to set up. We have search for files or folders. Then we have a create a shared drive. This one I'm not sure about. I think it'll be, we need a link, a shared link. And then it creates a draft, and then it iterates over attachments. So we might not even need this. If we want to make this very basic, where we just paste the URL of a Google Drive, this will get us started. But this we need to set up. So we're going to go and create a brand new GPT. So I'm going to call this email sender, or let's call it email drafter. I like to go and I go to Gmail logo. I like to give it a little pretty logo so I'm aware of exactly what it's for, especially if you want to use it in that agentic way that I showed you where you do at tool. It's really helpful if you have the actual image there. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to upload a photo. I'm going to upload this bad boy. There we go. So we got that going. For now, we'll keep the instructions at bay. I'll unclick these. I'll go to create a new action. And in this case, we're going to have to create some form of action to execute this process. So I'm going to open another tab of GPT. And then what I like to do a lot is if you've done the work before, which is why I'm going to be providing you all these different schemas for these different custom GPTs, you can repurpose a schema that's thematically being done for a certain tool. So if you create a Replit tool and you have a Replit schema that finally works, you can then use that Replit schema as the foundation for your new schema. So in this case, we already have a proposal maker using Make, and the main variable here is the webhook. Now we do need to customize, or we need GPT to customize all these different paths, but we can take this as a starting point. And then this is the part where I mentioned before, very in passing, Actions GPT. This was actually released by GPT themselves. So if you go to Explore GPT and you write Actions GPT, you should choose this one and you'll know which one it is, but it says ChatGPT. So click on this, click on that, and then we can say the following. I created this make.com schema in the past for a different automation. Okay. And I'll say what we need to do for this new automation is collect the following. The name of the person we're generating the email for, the email of that person, and a hint as to what the name of their proposal is. And I think that's all we need, especially if we go back to make. I like to take a little peek here. So we have the two. We need a subject line, actually. And then we need the content. The content will be, in this case, our Google Drive. So if we go back to here, and I'll say the email content that has our main content, written content presenting the proposal. And then we have a hint as to what the name of the proposal is from a Google Drive perspective. So I'll write that, and then what I like to do as well is I'm going to switch this out because I know this is not going to be a shared drive. We need a link to this actual file. So I'll just unlink this. I'll go back and I'll say share. So get a share link. So this should work. And for now, it's not going to connect properly, but I'm going to screenshot this because I love to give GPT as much context as possible. So I'm going to say, here's the context, screenshot of automation attached, create a new schema with our new webhook. So now we need a new webhook. So if we go back to make, I haven't set one up. I'm going to need to create one. So if I call this demo test custom GPT and I click save, we're going to create a brand new webhook here. I am then going to copy this and paste it into Action GPT. And then when we paste this, it should put together a schema for us. And now it's not always accurate. And you'll know when it's not accurate because you'll copy paste this into the schema tab in custom GPT. And then you'll get these weird red errors at the bottom. And what I usually do is I screenshot that error and I put it back until it's finally good. So in this case, it's called a proposal email automation API. We have this hook here. It's created the submit proposal email details where it's collecting person name, person email, email content, proposal drive hint, and we see that all here. So that's all required. Then we have the same responses, 200 or 400, 200 if it's all good, 400 if it's no bueno. So we copy that and we paste this here. If we do not get an error and we get this thing here pop up, which is our actual function, then we should be in the clear. And now make is waiting for us to actually send our first request so that the webhook, or the ear, as I like to call it, knows what to listen for every time. So if I just bring this tab closer and I click on test, it should configure and propose that it creates this request. I'll click confirm and you'll see it works because it says it talked to make. If I go back to make, now it says it's successfully determined what it's listening in for, which again are those 4 core variables. So to make sure it was working, I'm going to unlink this temporarily. I'm going to change this to immediately so that as soon as it gets that information, it runs. And now I'm going to activate this scenario. And then first I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to run this module. I'm going to run this again. And you'll notice what Custom GPT is really good at is it's good at testing dummy data. So I didn't tell it this person's Taylor Johnson with an email, etc. So it came up with that itself to be able to test it. So we'll do this again. And I will try to zip through to the other tab as soon as I click on confirm. All right, there you go. So it now listened and it got the person name, the person email, the email content, and then the proposal drive hint. So I know this is working. That's good. Step one. So now that step one's working, let's go to here. Now we want to be able to search in our Google Drive for one of these proposals. Now, not helpful that I created ones for Jim or Jimmy multiple times, but in this case, if we take that Taylor example, then we can create a proposal, add it into our Google Drive, and then it should be able to read it just fine. So if I go to authenticate myself in this Google Drive folder, I'll say I want you to select from a list, and I'll say my Google Drive. For a folder, I have a proposals folder, so I'm just going to say look at the proposals folder, and then what I want you to retrieve are files, and then search within files or folder names, full text search. Let's try full text search, and then the query, this is going to need to be whatever our hint is, right? So that's the whole point of collecting that variable, is I want to inject that as our search term to look for that file. So that'll be this. And I'll say I want you to only grab one file. And I want this on purpose so that if we have that case where we have Jim multiple times, we only pick one of those files. Meaning I should probably name my names better for these files in that automation as well. So hygiene goes a long way in making these work. So I'll click OK. And then assuming this works, and what I like to do is I like to unlink this chain every single time and run each step of the way so I can see that it's working. So I'm going to run this again. I'm going to click test. It should click confirm, and then I should see here if it works. Let me just run. Wait for new data. Oh, and I'll just do it again. All right, so it's sending that hook, and then we get a response here. And it's looking for a file. It won't find it, to be honest, because there is no file with, what's her name, Morgan Lee. But I know at least it's searching for it. So that's a good idea. And let's say we actually look for the client Jim or Jimmy Smith. Let's find the most unique name we have here. Proposal for Smith. Okay. Can we do a new test, but it's for someone named Smith. All right, and I'm going to click on confirm here, and I forgot to run this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make this immediately as data arrives. That'll make life easier. And then if I do run, I'll do use existing data, which is going to retrieve the last thing I sent. This is Alex Rivera. So let me just try this again. Try again. I wasn't lying when I said you'd watch me squirm. So let me just wait again here. All right, and if I click confirm. So initially I said Smith wrong the first few times. It said Jamie Smith instead of just looking for someone whose first name was Smith. So that ran, and if we look here, so I ran it again, and it ran Sam Smith instead of the right query. So I'm just going to be very intentional. Now that I know what we're looking for, I'll say run this test. Send this. Smith, only name. I won't even say that. I'll just say Smith at smith.com. Hi, how are you? And then I'll just say Smith is the hint. So if we send that over, this keeps toggling off, so I'll just say okay. And I will run again. I'll use existing data. So when I wrote it properly and it sent Smith at smith.com, and we had that Smith hint, and then we went here, you'll see that it worked properly and it found the file that was called Proposal for Jimmy Smith. Now, obviously I didn't make my life easier by having one called Jimmy Smith and another called Smith, and I only asked it for one version of it. So assuming this was a unique name, it would have found it perfectly fine. So at least that tells me that that's working okay. Now, if we go back to the diagram here, So now that we have this link, we can hook this up, and now we want to get the share link for that file. So what we want is that file, and then that file ID we're going to get from before. So what we need here is to actually run this whole thing, ideally, and I'm just going to say rerun scenario, rerun with same output. And I know it's very monotonous that I keep doing this, but I like to do it from end to end just so I can see the process from the GPT to the make automation. So here I got a failure, which I expected to get, which is fine. The main reason why I wanted to run this is I wanted the payload in memory so I can actually iterate on this. So I think I turned this off by accident. Run and use existing data. This is going to fail, which is fine because this is what I want. I wanted to see the output of this. So this file ID is going to populate now. So when I go in this Google Drive module, I can fix it because now that I've ran it, it now knows an example of a cached file. So if I go down, this lets me see the structure better. I want the actual web link view for the view link here. So that's the file ID. And then the role for the person receiving this Google file or this Google link we're going to put in our email. I want it to be used by anyone, so there's no restrictions there. Again, just to make our life easier. If this was confidential, then I wouldn't want to do that. And then when I click OK, now when I save and rerun this, let me put this back on, and then I'll click OK, and then rerun using existing data. Oh, we still got an error. So what's the error here? File not found, edit. So if I go back here, I think by me putting the web view link, that's a problem. I'll just put the actual file ID. That's a rookie mistake. So let me try that again. I'll click immediately and then run and then use the existing data. All right, perfect. So that's working. So now we have this link that should generate this file link that should be shareable. So again, another thing I want to make sure is ideally I can follow this whole link. Let me just do this. There we go. So hopefully this works and I can see that file. Amazing. We can. So we're making good progress here. And the last part is how do we inject this into the Google Draft? So the parameters here, I have to log myself in. All right, so I'm going to go to my prompt advisor's email and then folder. I'm just going to say put this in drafts whenever it's ready to go. Let me go to draft. There we go. And then I ideally want it to be the email from the webhook, which in this case is smith@smith.com. That's not going to work, but it is what it is. And then in terms of email content, I think subject we could maybe tweak so that we create a dynamic subject. We don't have to worry about extracting it always from the custom GPT. So I'll just pause there on that one. On the content, we'll say, hi there, here's your proposal. And again, I could make this super fancy and attach the actual file, which we'd have to figure out how to manipulate and download the file in a way to attach it as a file. But just to simplify things, I'm going to add the share link directly in this email, and I'll click OK. Let me just save this and see if that works. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my email, to my drafts, and just watch this. So I'll just run immediately, and then let's re-trigger this. Resend the exact same test with Smith. And hopefully it listens to me, it doesn't make something up. Okay, it did. So if we go back, everything worked except for this one. So if we click OK, curious why this would not have worked. So I'm going to resend that exact same request. Okay, so second time's the charm. We can see here, it looks like it's been successful. We'll know by going to here. Okay, so it looks like it ran twice. Here's your proposal. And if you click on this bad boy, there you go. You get the actual drive file. So we'll go into What am I doing there? All right, so let's add another step here. Let's unlink. Let's add a very basic GPT step. So let's add a step, use a very basic LLM. Okay, and let's do model. Let's do GPT-4 mini. And I'll do a user prompt here that says, you are a copywriter. Take the content of this email and make a engaging, short but succinct subject line presenting the proposal we've put together for them. Subject should be 3 to 5 words long. And now I'll actually put the email content that we'll be getting from the GPT. I'll click OK. And of course, I've put this over the thing. So I'll connect this to the email. I will go to here to auto align everything. And then in the Gmail, I will take whatever we get as a result of the completion. So if we go to message, it's going to be the content that we want. And then I'm going to say, you know what, best mark. And I'll click OK. And I'll save the scenario. Let's run it again. So let's rerun the exact same test. We'll click confirm. Let me just make sure it sent the Smith one. There we go. And then if we go back to the Gmail here, I think it would have ran already. It ran so quickly. Yeah, I think 411 ran very quickly. If I go back here and I close this, you can see here, exciting proposal inside. So now it's put together the subject line, the actual email, etc. So that looks good. Now, one thing I can say, there we go. So if we look here, this outputs in like these weird quotes. We don't want that. Do not output with quotes or apostrophes around the subject line. So I'll click OK, and we'll save this. This should be good too. Now, if I put this into GPT and be like a brand new thing here, in make, this is the body of my Gmail draft. I'll say make.com. I'll put this here. Can we make it so that it has HTML or something to indent properly the link from the rest of the message? Okay, and then I'll attach the actual screenshot of what it looks like. Now, I do know how I would do it, but just for the sake of your learning, if we do something like this. All right, so one thing in the drafts that it generated is, you can see here, we have hi there, here's your proposal, and you have this Google Drive link, and it's all in one line. Not a big fan of that. So I asked GPT to I took a screenshot, pasted it here, and I said, in make.com, this is the body of my Gmail draft. Can you make it so that it has HTML or something to indent properly? So in this case, it came up with this, and it told me what it did. Let's say I don't care for what it did too much. I'm going to just go back to make, and then paste it here. There we go. That should be intact. So if we run this again, and I won't belabor you by seeing me re-trigger it, by saying re-trigger the exact same test again. I'll just cut to it actually running. All right, so it ran in 2 seconds. And if we go back, refresh this bad boy, you see here, we have a subject line that does not have air quotes around it, which is good. And when we click this, it's properly indented. It's putting the proposal properly, and that's taken care of. And then there you go. You have the actual proposal there. So now you've built yet another agent to add to your army. So if we go back and we save this, all we need is the actual prompt to orchestrate this. So my hack is reuse the work you've already done. Go back into Custom GPT, back to where we were creating that schema, and I'm going to say, hey, act as a prompt engineer for a second. Write a prompt that will trigger this automation to run when it has the right inputs provided to it. Make it a very succinct and to the point prompt. Output it in a code block. Denote the name of the function in quotes like this, and I'll just say function. So if we do something like that, this will write the prompt for our custom GPT, so we don't have to worry about that ourselves. So in this case, okay, I'll just take that as a starting point. We'll go back to our custom GPT. This is all good now. So we'll go to here. I'll paste this, and I'll say when, let me put this at the bottom. You are an email copywriter. When you're called upon, your job is to help draft an email to someone, and you need to collect the following. Okay, so then we provide the following details to generate the send proposal email. When you have these inputs, send them and trigger this function here. So I'll just remove the when. So that should be good there. Then one thing is I'll say PS for the proposal drive hint, the person's name should be sufficient as a clue. As a clue. Wow. All right, so that's all done. So if I click on create here, we should have now finished yet another agent that we can call. So if we create a proposal, all right, so now we have this new GPT at our disposal, and we could be fancy and say, add a conversation starter saying, write my email. But if we add something in a new chat and we say, hey, proposal maker, make a proposal completely made up for a random name that is very uncommon. And I'm just doing this to make sure we don't get another Jimmy Smith. Okay, so let's assume that's all good. So it's created its own proposal. It's going to confirm that, and then that's going to trigger that other automation we had. So I won't click to that since we already saw that. So fingers crossed it will work. And then if it works, it should be done. I'll go to our proposals folder, and the person's name is Eulatrix Ven. Interesting. All right, so if I refresh, I should see something for our friend Eulatrix. There you go, proposal for Eulatrix. Okay, great. So let's go back. Let's go to Gmail, or what do we call it? Email drafter. And we'll say create an email with this proposal for this person. Now, do we have an email for him? Let's see if it pushes us back on this. All right. Now, one thing I'm remembering is, did we take input of email? We probably did not. Now, this could be actually an accidental but good mistake that I made. It's a good idea to not pre-populate that email so I have a chance to review it and make sure it actually doesn't send. So in a way, I was responsible without being responsible. Responsible without being aware, I should say. So this should have ran, and I'll just double check. We should have something for our friend here. Let's check. We found, what's their name? Let me go back to new scenario. This should have ran, at 420. We received Eulatrix. Now, did we find a file for Eulatrix? Here, let's go back to this. It should have found proposals for Eulatrix. That's all good. And if we go back to our email and refresh, all right, so we have here AI solutions for Nebulark, which is the name of this made-up company that the other agent created. All right, and then if we go to this proposal, it should be the proposal that we made for our amigo here, and there we go. Wow, that's quite the bill. 230,000. Very unlucky. Anyway, so that all works, and now we've created a brand new GPT or a brand new agent to add to your army. So now you can go from creating a proposal to mishmashing with the router agent in terms of messaging or copy, to logging their information in your database or your CRM of choice, to checking on any knowledge that might help enrich that proposal, to actually sending that proposal, drafting that proposal in your Gmail. So there you have it. This should give you a really good inspiration launchpad to go from looking at what I built to actually building what I built, seeing all the process, using Action GPT, using Perplexity when you need to, going back and forth and screenshotting everything to GPTs to kind of help you out, and using this handy feature at the bottom left of Make to actually give you some cheat sheet as to what you might want to build or what modules are available to help you build that thing. Now, everything that you've seen in this video will be in the Gumroad link in the description below, along with a couple other detailed looms to make sure you can recreate pretty much everything I've done. And if you love this content and it's helpful for you on your journey, please let me know in the comments below, like and sub the channel, and I'll see you next time.